From beautiful East Tennessee in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, you are listening to the Sherry Voluntary Show, and I do appreciate you spending your time with me. Today, my guest is someone I've had on before and someone that I also respect greatly, and that is Mr. Kyle Anzalone. And he has a fantastic podcast called Foreign Policy Focus. And I think it's just one of the best foreign policy podcasts around. He's also the editor in chief at immersionnews.com, a writer for the Daily News Roundup at the Libertarian Institute, and also has been featured on Consortium News. So, welcome to the show again, Kyle. Thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, Sherry, great to be back on the show. It's been a while, but thanks so much for what you said. And I don't know about one of the best foreign policy podcasts, but definitely one of the only ones. There's
Right.
not many others out there to compete with.
Well, I think it is though because I'm always like impressed by how level-headed you stay. Like for me, it's easy for me to go into hyperbole and to like rant. So I think you do a really good job of saying, staying balanced. So I don't know that I could necessarily do that well. So and just you have a lot of great content. So I think that's really wonderful.
All right, well, thanks.
So today we wanted to talk a little bit about the war in Yemen. And I don't really honestly know a whole lot. And I think that's probably, I know more than maybe most Americans, but still not a whole lot about it. And so I wanted to have you come on and just kind of tell us, what's going on, what's the situation, and whatever you think is pertinent about that. I do know that there have been, thousands of people have been killed since, say, 2015, when I think that's when everything sort of ramped up, correct? When the Saudis got involved.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I mean that's really when the big air war kicked off. But it wasn't like it was peacetime in Yemen even before that.
yeah. When did everything actually start officially? Like when does this come from like
Yeah,
a long
so
an old conflict that's renewed, or is this a new conflict?
it's a lot of all of it.
Okay.
So I mean, to go back, Yemen's a country in 1990 before it's North and South Yemen. It's uh, kind of formed together under the leadership, or depending on who you are, dictatorship of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who up until 2012 was the only president in Yemen's history.
Okay.
He rules pretty brutally. During his time, he often pits the different factions of Yemen against each other to help, kind of maintain his rule and legitimacy. Post 2001, he's actually a pretty good ally of the United States, or at least not an assessment from a libertarian
Right.
standpoint, but from the foreign policy establishment. And I believe he actually visits the White House, or meets George Bush at some point. But he's the recipient of a U.S. kind of weapons and funding program. We give you money so you fight the terrorists. Now, I'm not saying that Saleh never fought the terrorists, but he took a lot of those weapons and monies to fight groups in the north of Yemen. And between 2004 and 2012, I guess, there were 5 or 6 wars that he fought against a group of Zaidi Shias in the north, and then they formed together to form a kind of alliance militia called Ansar Allah, or more commonly known as the Houthis. And
Okay.
so the Houthis start fighting. They get stronger every time they fight Salah because they beat him, and probably establishes more legitimacy and support, and they take weapons from them, who are of course coming from the United States. And so then in 2010, you had the Arab Spring going on across the Middle East. Protests really ramp up in Yemen in 2011, and the United States swoops in, and under the kind of leadership of Hillary Clinton at the State Department, takes the government of Yemen, kind of kicks Salah out of power. There's an assassination attempt on his life, and I think he had to go to a foreign country to seek treatment, and the U.S. basically organizes so he wasn't coming back. She then organized an election to establish, quote unquote, democracy in Yemen, although there was only one name on the ballot. Last time I Googled this was about a year ago, but I believe still, if you go online, 2012 Yemen election, Mansour Hadi is the only name on the ballot. So he becomes president in 2012 under a very loose agreement that he would kind of hold on to power for the next, I believe, year, but eventually give that up and give up all these emergency authorities. But what he does instead is look to kind of empower his own factions, because Yemen is a pretty faction society. It's not, quite like the United States, I guess, which, we have our divisiveness too. But
Sure.
uh, so, anyways, eventually he pushes the Houthis too far. And in 2014, a fight breaks out between the Houthis and then the Yemen government in Sana'a, at that time controlled by Hadi. And the Houthis start to win this war pretty rapidly. Well, it turns out that the former leader, Salah, recovers and actually comes back to Yemen. Well, Yemen's not the United States, where when, Trump becomes president, the military is now loyal to Donald
Right.
Trump. He comes back to the country and takes a good chunk of the army with him. And so then they're able to take the capital city of Yemen, that's Sana'a. They take a key port city of Hodeidah, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in today's show, and actually push all the way down south to the country to the Gulf of Aden and force the, then president of Yemen, Hadi, to flee to Saudi Arabia. And I really don't think he's returned to Yemen for any significant stay since. And so in 2015, the Houthis are threatening to take probably like the final major city in Yemen that they need to take, which is Aden, the southern port city. And that's when Saudi Arabia gets involved and starts bombing.
Okay.
And this is March of 2015. So, in fact, if we aired this in the next week, it'll be right around the 1 year or 4 year, excuse me, anniversary of this war.
Wow. It just came into like the consciousness, at least from my perspective, within the past couple years. So, how long has the United States been actually providing? I think they're not actually. From what I've heard two different things. I've heard there are actually troops on the ground, but they're not supposed to be involved in conflict. And then I've heard there also aren't any troops there from the United States; that they're just lending like support in training and logistics and maybe materials. What's all that stuff? Like, how long has the United States been involved in this?
Yeah, so I guess one of the first things we should just mention is that there's really two wars going on in Yemen right now. There's this war led by the Saudis fighting against the Houthis, and then there's the American drone war in Yemen against Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And so if you look and remember back to the botched raid right at the beginning of the Trump administration, those are U.S. Special Forces troops on the ground. In fact, two Americans die in that raid. Not only one U.S. Special Forces, I believe he was a SEAL, but also the 8-year-old American daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki, who was shot in the neck and unfortunately, bled to death in the arms of her grandmother in Yemen. That her story is never
Wow.
paid attention, of course, to. Um, so yeah, there are boots on the ground in Yemen. Now there was a big issue surrounding the and Yemen war powers that the Senate passed in 2017 or 2018. So this isn't the current one. This is the previous one.
Okay.
And Elizabeth Warren had directly asked the Pentagon if the U.S. had like kind of soldiers on the ground supporting this conflict, and they said no. It turns out that there's definitely U.S. special forces on the ground in southern Saudi Arabia, and it's not exactly
Okay.
clear what they're doing there. Everybody kind of assesses that they're there, on seek and find missions for the Houthi ballistic missiles and their Scud missiles, which would mean they're crossing into northern Yemen. It's also worth noting that the Houthis actually have pushed into southern Saudi Arabia a few times. And
Okay.
so even if the U.S. troops are in Saudi Arabia, they could be, exposed to fighting. So yeah, there are definitely U.S. troops in and around this war.
Okay. So Saudi Arabia, from what I understand, they got involved in the conflict in the first place because they said it was a threat to their national security, I imagine. Uh, so there has actually been a crossing of their borders by the Houthi, is what you're saying. So that's part of what they said they were worried about. I don't know that that's actually the case. Is this the
Yeah,
kind?
well, I mean, that was a reaction provoked by the bombing campaign. So Saudi Arabia never stops bombing Yemen. The Houthis never cross into Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And it's not like, when we're talking about the Houthi army, they have a significant ground force. The big problem with their military tactics is they're just land mining. They put landmines everywhere. They use these landmines that are shaped like rots, and so a lot of innocent people end up dying, especially innocent people, trying to flee war. However, they don't have any kind of air force. I think their artillery capabilities are pretty limited. I think a lot of their capabilities are, small arms, AK-47, sniper rifles. They definitely have some pretty high tech, like anti tank guided missiles, and so these would be comparable to the American TOW missiles.
Okay.
So they do have some capabilities, but the only way for them to control like a plane, a flat area that goes on for miles, would be to landmine it. So this is kind of the consequence of this war. But a
Wow.
lot of civilians are dying in Yemen this way, and the unfortunate thing is, and we're seeing this in Syria, is that civilians will end up dying for years to come now,
Years.
right?
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, this is for the war, but these landmines are going to exist for a very long time.
Yeah. That's one of the most terrible things that you see after these kinds of conflicts is where, people are kids are just out playing and get blown up all over the place where, there's been a conflict and people put in landmines. It's really terrible. I did want to go back.
Real quick, just because we're on that, the Saudis are using American-made cluster bombs. I think from other countries as well, but these are bombs that explode and drop little bomblets. They're notorious for not exploding. If you
Right.
could, look up research on Cambodia and Vietnam, this is still a problem today, where some poor farmer is plowing his field and he
Yeah.
hits one of these, and at best it just destroys his tractor and probably bankrupts his family or
Right.
whatever. But Saudi Arabia has used these in Yemen, and in fact, PBS NewsHour reporter Jane Ferguson, so an American, travels to Yemen, smuggles herself across Houthi lines, and has footage of American-made cluster bombs in northern Yemen here. So it's pretty
Wow.
clear that this is going on.
That's it's just so incredible that we're still like that people are still using these kinds of things when they know that it lasts far longer than the conflicts tend to. But I guess, human life is not very relevant to them, to people like that. So I did want to go back to something that you had said before is that the Houthi are a coalition. So it's not an ethnic group, the Houthis.
Uh,
It's
the
not
the
one
backbone
ethnic group.
is definitely a group of Zaidi Shia, so it's like a
Okay.
set to Shia Islam, and for that reason, they often get like pushed to, oh, they must be allies with Iran. It's
Hmm.
important to know that I think in faith, and I'm not Muslim, so it's harder for me to like actually understand, but there's a pretty big difference between a Zaidi and like an Iranian Shiite. So
Right.
it's
Okay.
not to say that just because everybody is a Shia in Iran and everybody in northern Yemen is a Shia, they get along, because that's often the way it's portrayed in the U.S. media, is very surface level like that.
Okay.
But that's the backbone. But there is a lot of tribal support for the Houthis, and in fact, in late 2017, and I explained that Salah ends up teaming up with the Houthis even after fighting wars against him because he's ethnically a Zaidi. He backstabs the Houthis and tries to go back to
Mm.
the Saudi side of this war. And the Yemeni tribes didn't protect Salah, and the Houthis killed him.
Okay.
And so that was, I think, a pretty clear example that this actually does spread far larger than just the Zaydis. The territory controlled in Yemen, and can I do a screen share? Will people
Yeah,
be able to see
absolutely.
that? Um, yeah, let me do this real quick just to show
Sure.
people what the battle lines here are in Yemen. Can you see this yet? Um,
Not yet.
all right. Let me know when it pulls up.
Not there yet.
All right.
Don't know why it's not, but
Well,
oh,
hopefully
let
this will
me
work.
click this. Maybe that will. I might have to click something here. Nope, that didn't do it either. I don't know.
All right. Well, anyways, what I was basically going to say is that while it looks like the Houthis only control maybe a fourth of Yemen, they control well over 50% of the Yemeni population
Okay.
in that territory. So, and it's not like there's an active insurgency, at least that I could see, against them.
Okay. Your screen is frozen, by the way, on that side. um,
Oh, man. All right.
you could take a second if you need.
Just trying to figure out how to undo what I'm doing.
No, maybe it just froze up. That's technical difficulties are abounding today. I tell you what.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I froze it by doing whatever I was doing. Um, all right, well, I'm just clicking on things and it doesn't really
Sure.
seem to be helping at all.
Do you want me to maybe
Oh, do I might have gotten it here. How's this? Oh,
still frozen?
yeah.
Um, no, let's see. Yeah, it's frozen on both. Uh, maybe you want me to try calling you back?
Yeah.
Okay, just a
All right.
second. Hello.
Hey, sorry
Okay,
about that. It was
no
ringing
problem.
and then nothing ever came up to click on to answer it. So,
No problem. I know. I don't know what's going on with stuff. It's who knows. Maybe my yoga and hoop teacher friend always says that Saturn is in retrograde or something like some weird thing. So, anyways, let's see. Where were we?
if can I pick up and just kind of describe then, the Houthis controlling like a quarter of the country and then,
Yeah,
all right.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, anyways, what I'm just gonna explain real quick is that like the Houthis control maybe like a quarter of the country. If you look at a map, it's like the eastern kind of block of it, and not even all the way down to the coastline. But the rest of Yemen, anything kind of west of that, is really sparsely populated. And you'll see that large chunks of it are actually controlled by Al Qaeda or the Islamic State, and then the rest of Yemen being controlled either by the government and then the coalition. That's pretty much just Saudi Arabia and the Emirates really
Yeah.
backing and pushing that. So, but the
Okay.
Houthis do have a large portion of the population in there, and it's not just the Zaydis.
Okay. So I think there's so the you said that Al Qaeda and ISIL are controlling the southern part or the southeastern part, and
It
then
would be the like chunks of the western part of the
western.
country.
Okay. And
If
then
if you look at a map, there it's mostly desert. There was a time when they controlled a pretty important oil port but they had a negotiation with the Emirates. They were allowed to leave with a good chunk of money, a few $1 million and some
wow.
weapons, and then the Emirati forces kind of came in and took control over that port. But yeah, and
Wow.
just an important distinction is that in Yemen, Al Qaeda and ISIS weren't enemies like they are in maybe Syria.
Okay.
And so I think they're pretty much just the same group. And while the US will say, oh, now we have to bomb ISIS in Yemen, it's just another jihadist group. It's not
Right.
anything at war or trying to start a caliphate.
So are they actually connected then? Are they with those other groups, or have they just sort of taken up their banner since they're not fighting each other there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about the structure of ISIS to know, especially at this point with the caliphate. I think even today announced being completely defeated by the Syrian Kurds now,
Okay.
that they've kind of liberated the last of that ISIS territory. And they didn't turn up Baghdadi, so who knows where that guy is and what he's doing. There's ISIS affiliates that in Libya, in Western Africa that are growing. There's a small presence in Somalia. There's a group of Taliban in Afghanistan that go by Islamic State Khorasan, but I don't know if there's the same ideology for all these groups. It certainly doesn't seem like the other groups practice it. In fact, they were saying that the ISIS affiliate in Nigeria is being seen as a more moderate alternative to Boko Haram. So this isn't a group that's apparently
Well,
dunking people in acid.
right. Yeah, they're absolutely. I mean, it's all terrible, but it's hard. I guess when you don't have a structure like we would think of a military structure and those kinds of things. They're more cells that sort of do their own thing, but kind of have the same overarching mission or name, I guess, or it's really can be quite confusing just because there's so many fragments. But there's also is someone else controlling the north of the country?
Yeah, it would be the Houthis, and then there's the Yemeni government that controls like the southern city of Aden and Taiz, and
Okay.
parts of the country that's not controlled by ISIS or Al Qaeda out west. Um, I don't know how much of a ground force that group really has. There's a lot of Sudanese mercenaries that are a part of that fighting force. There's actually this weird thing that's been going on throughout the war, and that is there's a lot of refugees coming over from East Africa into Yemen thinking that there's a better life in Yemen and then work in Saudi Arabia for them. Unfortunately, it's just going into a war zone. And for those people who do make it across like the Red Sea there, that one of the only jobs they could get in Yemen is mercenary.
Right.
That's all that's really paying right now. So I'm guessing that that's a large part of the force. There was a nephew of Ali Abdullah Saleh who, after Saleh defected, he also defected, and he has a couple thousand fighters fighting for that Saudi force. There's actually a breakoff group in Yemen who's not Al Qaeda or ISIS or a part of the Saudi coalition that wants to just break away South Yemen from North Yemen and just say, we're done with the Houthis, we're doing our own thing. The Muslim Brotherhood has a pretty big stake in southern Yemen. And in fact, a very interesting story of this war that really didn't get much coverage here, but I was intensely fascinated by, was the UAE was paying American contractors, so former American special forces and stuff, to go into Yemen armed with UAE rifles and assassinate political leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. So
Wow.
these weren't even militants. It was murder then. This isn't anybody who's, picking up arms to fight anybody.
Right.
And you go and kill them on behalf on the orders of another government. And I don't know. It seems to me like that has to be some kind of war crime, and
Yeah.
the U.S. should be prosecuting this. But shrug,
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard for them for the United States to call for any kind of prosecution of anyone because we commit war crimes every day. So I think maybe they're just keeping quiet about it because why rock the boat, right?
Well, I mean, these are American mercenaries, so
Right.
American citizens, so they should be subject to international law. And I mean, these guys pretty much openly bragged about this, I believe, to the Daily
Mhm.
Beast, who end up writing this story. And so they're living somewhere in some Western country. You would think that somebody
Right.
be able to pick them up and
Who knows?
charge them.
Who knows if the United States is paying them to do those things? Like I always wonder if when things like that don't make sense, maybe there's, a reason. Maybe it's that they use them for something too and don't, they like having them there. I don't know. Um, I was going to ask you about now we know America has been involved in sort of training and aiding Saudi Arabia in this campaign of bombing and waging the war. What other countries are helping to do that? I know Great Britain is doing that as well, correct? The UK. Uh, do you know of the other countries that are supporting them, and are they mostly Western countries?
Yeah, so I actually have a list here. The Saudi coalition, there are some Arab partners like the UAE, Egypt, and Sudan are still on board with this coalition. I believe Morocco and Jordan have left the coalition because of some of the crimes that Saudi Arabia is committing. At the beginning of the Trump presidency, we had the split in the GCC. This was kind of a big deal under Tillerson's rule as a State Department,
Okay.
where Saudi Arabia and the Emirates blockaded Qatar. Well, they were a part of this coalition, but that split kind of caused them to break off. And in fact, then all of a sudden, Al Jazeera, which is kind of the Qatari state media, got real good on reporting about what was going on in Yemen. So kind of interesting how that works out.
Yeah.
Um, then the UK is definitely responsible for selling them a lot of weapons. Some Western countries, like the Netherlands and Germany, have actually banned arms sales to Saudi Arabia in the wake of not just the Yemen war, but also the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So those kind of two events were enough to push Germany away. The UK foreign minister actually was pretty aggressive towards the Germans for cutting off these arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and are putting a lot of pressure on Germany to open up the arms sales to Saudi Arabia again, which is very disappointing to see. I mean, if you're going to shamefully support the war,
Right.
at least try to do it covertly. Don't pressure, your allies into staying in it. One thing you haven't had at all about this war, and I think this is largely because of the U.S. and UK, is any kind of UN action against Saudi Arabia here. I mean, the kind of big humanitarian thing I think you could point to is the blockade of Yemen,
Yes.
where let's say you're an aid ship coming in, even from a group like the Red Crescent or the Red Cross, so big international aid group, you're forced to go through weeks of inspection. Sometimes, you get everything inspected. You had to go to a port a few hundred miles north in Saudi Arabia to get the inspection. You go back south, and they turn you around again, send you back up. So, this is something that you would think the UN might take action on, but the US and UK have veto power in the Security Council, so
Right.
they really provide a lot of diplomatic support. As well as the US also providing support in supporting that blockade,
Yeah.
which is important to know too, because that's absolutely a crime against humanity.
Sure. I I'm always amazed at how much the United States shields Saudi Arabia. Like this isn't the only instance or the only case where the Saudis are shielded, and it's probably money. I would think they would give a lot of money. I know they give a lot of money to the Clintons, and I think the Bushes as well, if I'm not mistaken. So they've sort of bought political favor, and it's allowing this to go on, and it's incredible. I think that's a swamp. If the president wants to drain a swamp, that'd be a really great one to start with. Um, so we talked a little bit about the blockade, and there are restrictions on food and fuel imports. Who has placed these restrictions, and why? Why would this is always the case that civilians suffer the worst. I know there's millions of people displaced by this, and a lot of suffering, cholera outbreaks, things like that. So why would they put restrictions on the things they need? Is it because they believe that it'll be taken by the other forces? What is going on there?
Yeah, so I guess the Saudis can make some legitimate complaints, right? That if they bring this aid into, so the only port in Yemen that could handle like the big cargo ships is the port of Hadada. All the other ports don't have like enough of, I guess, a depth to bring those kind of ships in. However, that port's severely limited in what they could offload because early in the war, Saudi Arabia bombed the stationary cranes on that port, and then the U.S. bought some mobile cranes and we're trying to bring them in. Saudi Arabia didn't let them in the country for like 2 years, but now they have these mobile cranes, but they can't do half the work that those big cranes could before. But anyways, the Port of Hadada is in Houthi territory, so even if aid comes in, I'm sure the Houthi military and their militia guys aren't the ones that are starving to death. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate, and it's a problem with the Houthis. However, it's kind of a reality of when you do business in this kind of situation. That if you want to bring aid to people, you have to do it that way. And not only are they stifling just the aid coming in. It's also just the commerce, right? And so there's a lot of people in Yemen who do have money. There's like $3 billion of remittance that comes into Yemen every year. So Yemenis around the world are really trying to support their countrymen, but food just can't get into that country because it's being slowed down. So if there's no food at the market, then you have to be reliant on aid. And
Right.
also, you see a jack up in food prices on and all this other
All the
stuff.
economic fallout of the conflicts and the blockade and everything that is so terrible. I know, like,
But I will say the worst part of all this, and is Martha Mundy wrote in her study for the I think like World Fund or something like that, that this is a food war. That Saudi Arabia has deliberately targeted food and food infrastructure, down to bombing flocks of like different sheep and goats and stuff like that to make it so that the people break. You know what I mean?
wow,
I think when you look at how vicious this bombing campaign is of Yemen, and the food war they're waging and all the restrictions they place on the Yemeni people, which was already an extremely poor country coming into this war, which already relied, like 80% or so on imports of food, starve or comply.
right.
So if you want to throw off the Houthis and accept our government, then you could eat. If not, you'll starve.
Right, you'll watch your children starve. Yeah, it's
Yep.
that has to be. I mean, I don't know what's in the Geneva Convention, right? But that you would think that'd be a direct violation of some kind of international law set up. Is that the case? And is that again where the United States is sort of shielding
Yeah,
Saudi
I mean, I
Arabia?
can't I can't cite the specific code, but I know cases in the past. I believe like Israel's blockade of Egypt at one point, and there's other things like this that were condemned and are definitely against like international humanitarian law, but it's a genocide. So you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
this seems like kind of almost a silly complaint. Is, oh, is it technically against like UN law? I mean, the U.S. already says they're just not going to let ICC, which is a UN's criminal court, come into the United States. So we know nobody's going to be held under accountable under humanitarian law or international law, anyways. But all we could do is call it a genocide and tell our leaders and shame them and never vote for them again.
yeah. It's always reminds me of the Madeleine Albright comment of the 500,000 dead children was worth it, and I'm sure it's the same case here. That these aren't American children and they're not Israeli children, so who cares? I it just To the U.S. it seems like those are the only two countries that really matter, and then our bigger allies like Britain and Canada, places like that. But I, it just seems like that life, this country of 85% identifying Christians that so many people say they value life, they don't value life when it doesn't come wrapped in an American flag. Like that's the thing. It always sticks out to me so much that it's okay to kill and starve and bomb and infect other people's children, but when it comes to our own, then they're somehow more precious to us than those children are to their parents. Like, it's a twisted mentality. I,
Well, I mean, look how cynical it is, though. When you have, for example, Assad bombing Aleppo, right, on one side of the Euphrates River, it's a crime against humanity. Every
right.
single child that dies is a huge deal. You actually have Western media interviewing a 7-year-old Syrian child,
Yeah.
and then if that child dies in Raqqa, on the other side of the Euphrates River by U.S. bomb,
Never
nobody even
mentioned.
knows.
Yeah. Do you think now I know this may be out of your side of your lane, but do you think there is like collusion with, say, the United States state, like the Pentagon and then the media, because this whole thing has not gotten the kind of press that it should.
I mean, I would say yes and no. I think it's. I don't think there's like a handshake. You know what I mean? I don't think the Rupert Murdoch shakes hands with
Right.
James Madison. They agree that
Yeah.
this is how they're gonna handle a certain
Not that
situation.
direct.
Right, but there's going to be people in the Pentagon who leak information to the press, and I do think there's a very coordinated effort in the Pentagon to let certain information come out. And I think that there's people in the press that understand that, hey, if they, write the kind of stories that their Pentagon sources want to report, then they're going to continue to be able to write these big dollar stories for the New York Times and Washington Post, because these really important people from the Pentagon are going to be they're going to get taught to, right? And so that's their access is, writing these kind of stories. So I don't, in a way, it's almost more cynical because it's like everybody's just doing their
Right.
own thing, and I don't see like the grand conspiracy, but there's certainly this whole like everybody. I think everybody has to know that they're all kind of mutually benefiting from this
Right.
kind of thing. Maybe they all believe it more than I I do. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right though. I mean, we know as libertarians that the world operates on incentives, right? So if a reporter is incentivized to keep their mouth shut so that their sources don't dry up, that's sort of, it plays into their own desire to have a good career rather than their, moral obligation to not support evil. So, and they are also subject to the indoctrination for the most part of, that we're the good guys and we're doing good things and this is unfortunate but has to be done. It's just amazing. I have actually had people that I've talked to, say on Facebook or, out and about, that don't believe that the United States is supporting the war in Yemen, if they even know about it. They don't believe that there's any support there. So I'm always amazed at that. Like it's clear there's support there. It's just, there's this disconnect of what
Right. Well,
is actually going on in the world.
yeah, because there is this kind of sense that they say, oh well, it's not really war support. I mean, for a long time we were providing mid-air refueling to the Saudi
Right.
coalition, which was absolutely necessary to wage the war. We are gassing up their planes so they
Right.
could bomb Yemeni cities, or else they wouldn't have been able to. Certainly not as effectively as they did.
Yeah.
And so in late 2018, they actually announced that the Emirates were taking that over after they were extensively trained by the
Right.
United States. And so this, is
We
one of
talk.
those other things that we should realize is a consequence of the war, is that now you have this Saudi Emirate coalition together that could provide mid-air refueling to their planes. It's ran by Mohammed bin Zayed in the Emirates and Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi. These people are absolutely nuts, and you gave them this great capability and great planes to do it because of this war.
Right. We sort of taught a man to fish, right? We taught them what they need to do in order to take care of their war, like to
Right.
perpetuate it. So that's really, it's amazing to me that it just, the denial that people are in, they don't even want to look at what our part in things may be. And I find this talking about South America a lot and immigration, where people blame the immigrants for coming here illegally, but they never want to hear that other side when I bring up, well, we've made their countries the shitholes that the president called them, and now I think we as in the United States sort of owe them a debt of, we don't realize we've destroyed any hope of you having a prosperous life and raising your children there, and then we also shame them and put their kids in cages when they want to come here. It's a twisted sort of mentality, and I I don't know, where you. I guess we just keep doing what we're doing in order to fight that and make more and more people understand that if they are willing to. But I
Right.
know.
Well,
Mhm.
no, just on that, because I think that point is so important that people say, like, oh, well, when they come, I wasn't responsible for that foreign policy.
Right.
So when they come, they say, I don't owe them anything. But, the problem is that, yeah, they're really not responsible for the foreign policy. They probably didn't even know it was going on.
Right.
And, most of the people behind it were probably unelected, like, kind of bureaucrats. I mean, think of the people who get appointed. John Bolton wasn't elected by
Right.
anybody. Mike Pompeo wasn't elected by anybody. At least, yeah, get congressional approval. Um, But all these people that often end up driving the U.S. foreign policy, like it'd be John or Paul Wolfowitz. I guess at least Dick Cheney's name was on the ballot before. Hillary Clinton, Mike Flynn, all these guys. They end up unelected, and so I guess you're really not responsible for that policy. But yet, when the consequences come to you, you have to realize that those people were harmed by your government.
Right.
You're paying taxes here,
Yeah.
and so. I don't know. It's important to foreign policy too, because we never realize that's really going on either, and how terrible it is. But yeah, eventually a bill's gonna come due, and
Yeah.
somebody's gotta pay it.
Right. And I think when you are presented with that information, like there's no shame in being ignorant, right? But when you're presented with that information, like this is why they want to come here. This is a big part of why, because the American government, the CIA in particular, has had a hand in undermining their governments and destabilizing these countries. And just the dominoes fall from there, and it goes into terribleness, funding rebels to actually, create this havoc. And when you're faced with that and you go, not my problem, I think that's where your ethical, stance should begin. Like, oh, I didn't know about that. And now, okay, so what am I going to do differently? Who am I not going to support now? If you believe in the system, which I don't really believe in it because I think it's flawed. Like it allows for things like this. It actually causes them. But these people who believe in like the system, the constitutional government, then that's the only recourse you have, is to vote differently and maybe lobby your congressman and things like that. But they never want to take that step because they can just go, not my problem. I didn't have anything to do with it. It was not my president, or he was doing the best that he could, or whatever. It's a terrible cycle. And I think Americans have this hubris of, we're the good guys. And, maybe there have been some people, it's like people make that excuse for the cops. There's a few bad apples, right? There's a few bad apples and they cause a little bit of problems around the world. But, overall, we're a net positive, where I would say exactly the opposite, that overall the United States is a net negative in the world and causes a lot more damage than it pretends to alleviate. So it's sort of a rant, but I just think it's always important to point out that there's a human cost that is paid for all of these things. And it's not paid by Americans very often, not yet. But I think Americans are, if you're the praying kind, I think you should pray for America, because I think our bill's, like you said, going to come due at some point. And, it's our children that will suffer. And I hope that they don't suffer as hard as terribly as some of these other people have suffered, because you can't blame them for hating us, right? It's not because of our freedom. So you can't really blame them.
Right. And I mean, like, so much of the policy is just so institutionalized too. I mean, think of how like big of a impact the drug war must have on some of these smaller countries like Guatemala or Honduras or
Yeah.
Nicaragua, where, because Americans love blow and heroin and we spend billions and billions of dollars
Yeah.
on it a year. And we also, I guess, are ashamed of that habit and make the rest of the world adopt it into a black market. Who knows? Some of these other countries may do it themselves, but because we say it's a black market, all of this, trade and transaction that ends up being, a sizable chunk of these countries' economies has to go and occur under the black market. That means if there's any disputes, they have to be resolved through violence. There's no recourse through courts. You end up with tons of corruption in the governments because, the governments have to have policies that enforce the drug laws, but there's billions of dollars worth of drugs going the other direction. So they're just going to bribe the cops until the cops say, well, it's better for my children that I take, these,
Yeah.
tens of thousands of dollars so I could feed them, give them nice clothes, send them to school, not because they're corrupt, crooked jerks, because they want what's best for their family. And there may
Right.
be a threat of violence on the other side of it. And so you end up, ruining the kind of the structures and the institutions that you largely impose on all these countries. And then when the migration comes north, you try to reject them at the border,
Right.
and everybody says I'm not responsible for the problem. And I guess in some way you're not, but in a big way we all are.
Right. Yeah. If they believe in we the people, I hear people say that, and we the people are the government, which I don't actually believe. But if that's the case, then you are responsible. If you really believe that, then you absolutely are responsible because you're the person that keeps backing that system. It's just so much to that. I don't know when it's going to stop. But to get back to Yemen, I know that there have been or the famine situation there, that there are 17 million people facing famine, and because of all of the factors that you already mentioned. And then we also have the bombings, but there's also been this cholera outbreak. And from what I understood, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that this is mainly in the Houthi controlled areas where they don't have infrastructure. There's just garbage all over the street. I saw some pictures that's just piled and piled, and it's causing this cholera outbreak that's killing tons of people, and just the suffering is terrible. And there's no medicine or treatments.
All right, yeah. So I think this is in 2016 that the government of Yemen, the Hadi government, the Saudi-backed government of Yemen, decides to move the central bank from Sana'a to Aden. And basically, what was happening in the first year or so of this war is that the central bank was just paying the salaries for all the workers. So whether you were Houthi or part of the Yemeni government, if you were collecting trash, if you're a school teacher, I think even some of the soldiers on both sides, they were all still receiving their government paycheck,
Hmm.
which is like a huge percentage of the Yemeni population was either a recipient of a government paycheck and worked a government job, or was one of their dependents, wife, children, etc. So you have just a huge number of people cut off. So I mean, I haven't seen the huge piles of trash on the streets of Sana'a, but my guess is that's probably not surprising because all the trash men stopped getting paid.
Right.
And I'm guessing that if you're a trash man, you're not getting a paycheck, you have to go find work somewhere else, so you're not picking up the trash.
Right.
So that's been a problem, that kind of all this what is it called, public infrastructure has, I'm sure, started to deteriorate.
Sure.
There's been a lot of like water treatment facilities even hit by Saudi airstrikes, with people not working,
Wow.
roads and bridges destroyed. Will Porter, a friend of mine who's a journalist, tells this story that he got from a Yemeni man who said, one of the problems is that, let's say, the war breaks out, and at the time the nearest hospital is like an hour away. Well, the bridge between you and the hospital is destroyed, so now it's 4 hours away. But there's not enough fuel, so you got to do some walking, some bus rides. So now it's 8 hours away. But then that hospital gets destroyed by an airstrike, and now the nearest hospital is 20 hours away.
Wow.
And so, think of that, as an example to get to the hospital, but to get food somewhere. It's a lot longer. Of course, there's inherent risks of driving around anywhere in Yemen with the Saudi air war. I've seen them, videos of them bombing ambulances, funerals, schools, weddings. So the air war is
Yeah.
absolutely brutal, and so that this creates all those kinds of problems. But specifically to the cholera epidemic, that number of like 1 million cholera cases, according to Claire Manera, who was like kind of the Yemeni director with Doctors Without Borders at the time, did kind of admit on the Scott Horton show that that number was probably too high. Uh, the symptoms of cholera are just dehydration,
Yeah.
and it can actually kill you because you're vomiting and
Yeah.
diarrhea and so much is
Yeah.
disgusting. But there's a lot of things that could cause those symptoms. So anybody who was coming in with those symptoms was being labeled with cholera and given cholera treatment, which is just fluids.
Right.
So same treatment's the same. I believe over 2,000 people end up being documented killed from that cholera epidemic, and the outbreak is always worse during the rainy season because then with the unsanitary conditions, the destruction of the infrastructure,
Right.
water gets contaminated. And also, part of the blockade is that at time chlorine tablets have been limited from entering Yemen, and that's what you would drop it in water to
Right.
sanitize it.
Wow. That's it's really interesting because here in the United States, if we have a handful of people die of, say, swine flu, it's an epidemic, and they're getting vaccinations or treatments, whatever, going, and then people just don't care when there's thousands of people dying from this cholera outbreak, which is really a terrible way to die. It's a very terrible way to die. Um, and so you had mentioned the water treatment, that I had gotten a statistic somewhere that said 2/3 of Yemenis don't have clean water. That there's just not any, and like you said, a lot of the infrastructure has been just destroyed, as far as buildings and any, I don't, any kind of water treatment plants they would have, like, those have actually been targeted by the Saudis, um, which is just, I mean, that if that's not a crime against humanity right there, I don't know what is. Like, water is the most basic necessity. Food is the next one. Like, and those are the things that have just been destroyed and withheld. So it's a very terrible situation.
Right. Well, and just remember, you say it's intentionally. They say it's unintentional, but that means, oops, I destroyed a
Right.
water treatment facility and now a bunch of children are going to get cholera, but I'm going to go out and bomb again tomorrow. Either way, it's
Yeah.
horrific.
Right.
Whether it's almost worse if you know you're too incompetent to do it right and you
Yeah.
keep doing it anyways. At least if you're intentional, you understand it's just malice and, people being shitty.
Yeah. Yeah. So many people are, it seems. So I had also sort of come across this idea that the country is deadlocked. Do you think that's the case, that there's sort of just this deadlock of the fighting and it's not really, no one's accomplishing anything, no one side is coming out on top?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a hell of a lot to talk about when it comes to Yemen over the past 4 years, but one of them is not changing borders. For the most part, they have remained the same. If you look at a map of Yemen and look at the west coast of the country, the Saudi coalition has taken kind of the low-lying flatlands along the Red Sea all the way up to the city of Hadeda, but has not been able to take the city of Hadeda. So the like other than those like few kilometers that has changed hands, there hasn't been a whole lot of that. And Saudi Arabia really struggles to maintain that territory. The mountain highlands are really kind of the stronghold of the Houthis. And so if you imagine there's a few miles of flatlands and then you get up into the mountains, the Houthis have been able to use kind of those anti armor guided missiles to really cut the Saudi supply lines trying to head up to Hadeda.
Right.
So there really hasn't been any significant changes in battle lines. The Houthis have taken some territory moving east, but it really doesn't seem to be significant. And every time it does, it provokes tons of Saudi airstrikes that end up just killing more and more people. The city of Taiz is kind of a south central city in Yemen, has been under a half siege for 3 or 4 years now, where like the battle lines are actually semicircled around the city. So that has to be absolutely miserable for the people living there. You try to go about your life somewhat normally because this is 4 years now.
Right.
So imagine if you have like a teenager, they were a child when this is going on, and this is their childhood is growing up in this war. And yet there's errant sniper fire and mortar fire all the time that's killing people. If you venture outside of the city, you're risking getting hit with mines and IEDs. So I mean, it's an incredibly dangerous way to live. And
Yeah.
hell, I mean, compared to other areas of Yemen, this is kind of, I think safer behind the lines of Taiz.
Right. Yeah. I wanted to double back to something you had said earlier, about the Sudanese that are fighting there, that there's many mercenaries. But I had also read that there have been like people enslaved to fight, like a conscription being done in Sudan because the Sudanese government had been being paid by Saudi Arabia to conscript some people and send them in there to fight. Is that true?
I mean, when I talked about this story on my show, I said, I don't know if it's actually slavery, but you can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
So what's going on here is this either this Sudanese government either was looking for loans from Saudi Arabia, loan forgiveness from Saudi Arabia, or actually just some payments. I don't know. It was a financial transaction, and part of that transaction was, these Sudanese fighters going to fight in Saudi Arabia. Now, these weren't people who were enlisting to fight in that war. Oh, I support my government. I want them to get some money from Saudi Arabia, so I'm going to go fight. These people are conscripts, and so people in Sudan who probably don't know where the hell Yemen is, know what the hell Yemeni is, or anything to do with
Right.
that country, is now being conscripted and going to fight. And it's been about a year since I read anything about this, but the Sudanese people were not happy, and I know there's some pretty big protests going on in that country now. You has to, have to think that this may have something to do with it.
Mm,
And I know Sudan has looked to kind of back off their role in this war a little bit because it's very ugly. Like I
yeah.
said, this is the best giving it the best take you can. It's a very ugly situation, but it seems to me like, kind of enslaved to fight.
Yeah, that's I mean, in my opinion, conscription is slavery, so, like you said, there's really no difference. You're asking someone to put their life on the line, over threat of violence or being, jailed, so there's not really a choice. There's no choice. Um, I'd also wondered if America stopped supporting the Saudi and the Saudi coalition, would the war actually end, do you think, without the support, or have we trained them and given them enough already to continue it? Or it seems like that plays a big um, part in keeping the other supporters from the other countries going as well. So, do you think if America actually pulled out of there, that would stop, and other people would pull out of their support?
Yeah, I guess it kind of means what does that support me? If we stop all weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, that'll eventually stop the war. They're gonna run out of bombs, and so so there's that. The maintenance on the airplanes I hear is very important. They're mostly American-made airplanes. They're using their contracts with Americans to fix up those airplanes, and they need a lot of maintenance. I mean, these are pretty high-tech machinery, so it's not like they could fly for years on end without American maintenance. So I
Mhm.
do think they would start to have trouble pretty quickly without U.S. help. Unfortunately, like I said, they've trained up the Emirates to do the mid-air refueling, so you kind of
Yeah.
taking that away. Um, I don't know what the will of the Saudi government is, and if they would lose support of Sudan and Egypt and maybe other coalition countries if we decided to withdraw. If we take that step, there's a lot of things to have to play out. But I think the important thing would just be is that if the Saudis see the U.S. is losing political will for the war and kind of the popular will to fight it or at least ignore it, then they may start to see like, hey, we gotta find some way to wrap this up in a way that doesn't look too bad, and so that could
Yeah.
hopefully start to roll back at least. You know what I mean? It can't make it worse.
Right. This question has just come to me, and it may be a silly question. I don't know, but do you think that the United States is so involved in keeping Saudi Arabia, there a connection with them because of the whole historical, Cold War and whatever with Russia? Do you think they might be afraid that they might um, then seek Russian backing for these things? Is that is that something that it might even play into it? I mean, maybe that's just
Yeah, to me, the argument that Saudi Arabia may spin off into the Russian orbit always seemed like more of something that like somebody at a think tank like a Robert Kagan would write up to make all the congressmen have like a intellectual excuse for not, are continuing to support Saudi
right.
Arabia. A couple big things that stand out to me is why the U.S. really wants to support Saudi Arabia. Jared Kushner's relationship with Mohammed bin Salman. Unfortunately, that's very ugly, but I think very important. The U.S. and Donald Trump have really staked their claim on that side of the, anti-Iran, anti-Qatar spectrum, and even now, the more kind we move forward in Syria, it's definitely on the kind of Israeli Saudi favor versus the Turkish favor. So
Mhm.
if you're looking at a Middle East and from a more strategic standpoint than I would ever want to get into, yeah, I guess the United States could see itself kind of being an isolated ally of Saudi Arabia just because they're, acting belligerent towards everyone else,
Yeah.
though. The weapon sales, I think, are something that captivate Trump. I don't actually believe they really help the American economy, but Donald Trump likes to say billions, and they buy billions of dollars of American weapons.
Right.
And another big one, of course, is the policy that Trump is trying to carry out right now against Iran and Venezuela, cutting their oil exports to hold those countries hostage and force them to comply with all of America's whims.
Mhm.
And there's no way that America could do that without Saudi Arabia keeping their oil exports where they are, if not higher. You have emerging economies like China and India, who, if the U.S., tries to take all the oil off the market and the oil price spikes, I think they'll just ignore U.S. sanctions and, even look to the own currency kind of thing that everybody's always fretted about, the,
Right.
losing America as a world reserve currency. Well, that could happen by Donald Trump if he, just keeps making all the oil producers of the world mad.
Sure. It's sort of the same idea that we ask of, or that I do. I don't know about your position, but that I ask of people is to stop, like the belief in the authority is the problem. If you just stopped listening to them and we all just went about our lives, like we wouldn't have to answer to them because there's way more of us than there are of them. And it's sort of the same thing. Like other countries are just going to go, fine, do your thing. Like we don't want anything to do with you anymore. So it seems like Trump may be pushing them to that position that they don't necessarily want to take, but we're incentivizing them to do that, to go around us and realize they don't really need the United States to lord over them and to run the world. And then I mean, I don't know if that's a worse position in my opinion, but I'm sure it's not a great position to be in, especially if, the dollar is devalued and all that. It's not a great thing for us living here.
Well, yeah, and I have some Trump, libertarian-ish conspiracist who claim that this is Trump's overall goal. He's gonna push us out of NATO by pissing off all the Europeans,
Right.
and he's gonna get us out of world affairs just by making America so undesirable. Oh, he's gonna make these ridiculous positions with
4D
Iran and North
chess.
Korea. Yeah. I don't buy that. I don't think any of this is intentional. But if it is one of the unintended consequences that this time go a little bit our way, I'm not going to complain.
Right. Yeah, it's like you're making yourself. It's like when they say, "Well, the left is eating itself." It's sort of the same thing. Like pushing yourself into a more libertarian position completely by accident, but we'd be okay with it. So before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to bring to light about this situation that I haven't asked about? Something that you think is important for people to understand?
Yeah, I mean, remember, there's 28 million people in Yemen. As you said, like 17 million or some other number are kind of in that risk of famine.
Yeah.
When you look at I saw like the phase 5 or whatever they're calling it, where it's the most severe, like these people are actually starving to death. That number I think is now encroaching like a million Yemenis. They've estimated 400,000 children are severely malnourished. These are the kids that have to go to treatment centers to get food. They can't just like eat their way out. A lot of people are boiling down leaves and just eating, leaf paste, and that's the way they're trying to get enough calories to survive. Save the Children has estimated that about 85,000 children have died from the impacts of the war. ACLED is estimating that 80,000 civilians have been killed that they're going to be able to document. I guess not actually killed because the estimate, people killed out in the
Right.
middle of the desert don't count. That's about 80,000, or that might be civilians and combatants total, the ACLED number. But, we're talking about high numbers. And of
Yeah.
course, then, later on when you look down the road at the access death rate and all that, I'm sure it's going to be a lot higher. And we could really be talking about numbers, in the upper hundreds of thousands, if not millions,
Yeah.
the way this war is going. And then, I was recently reading a report on South Sudan, and the hostilities in South Sudan really did turn down in 2018. There was a peace agreement put in place that certainly hasn't held the country, perfectly together. It did turn it into the United States of America, but I think it really did ramp down the violence in that country. However, they find that it didn't help the humanitarian situation at all, because these wars and the brutality of them, just destroy the fabric of what the country was. Think of, all the people, like different leaders of different towns and groups who have been killed off, and there's no clear secession. And so, there's a lot of power vacuums, even at the local level. All these deals that are negotiated with, like, surrounding towns and villages and tribes then fall apart and have to be reworked out and renegotiated.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple things in Yemen that I find, to just emphasize what this is probably doing to the Yemeni culture. In Yemen, I guess it's customary for the bride's family to walk to like the village of the groom's family. Well, there's been several times that, these people are quote unquote mistaken as a group of terrorists and bombed. And so you have, people trying to walk to their wedding day in
Yeah.
like this Yemeni custom and tradition. And so I'm sure, like people probably assess, well, do I really want to risk being bombed or uphold my family tradition?
Right.
You also have a tradition in Yemen where at funerals, people really try to come together and resolve whatever differences that occurred, that led to the death if it's violent. And so you had a situation in Yemen where over 150 people were killed by Saudi airstrikes on a funeral. They knew it was a funeral. They bombed it multiple times.
Wow.
Some of the most horrific video I've ever seen. And then after the death of Ali Abdullah Saleh, the Houthis actually celebrated his death and like held these big parades and everything to celebrate a man who was, really the leader of a united Yemen for, all the time. Pretty much, it was a united Yemen, and despite everything that happened during his rule, seemed to be a somewhat respected man in Yemen. You had Saudi Arabia flying over the crowds these days, carrying out sonic booms with, their planes, and very loud bang.
Right.
It's terrifying.
Terrify people. Yeah. That's terrible. I think too, like the long term consequences, like you were saying about cultural consequences, but also just the consequences of healthcare and the generations, like you see in, say, Japan after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where you just have these like lost generations where people are have health problems and all these issues, and you just think about like children not getting proper nutrition when they're little. Like that affects you your whole life. And so there's so many unintended consequences and far-reaching consequences that you just can't know what that's going to do to a country and to these people, and they haven't done anything to deserve this. It's not like they've tried aggressed on someone. It's
Right. Well, I'm sure somebody who has said women not getting proper prenatal care is equivalent to
yeah.
child abuse. Well, here in Yemen, you have women who are so malnourished themselves that they can't even breastfeed their own children.
Wow.
And, to talk about, like children getting vitamins and nutrition when they're young being so important to development. And we have all these studies out now about, sudden the infant
Death
death
syndrome, yeah.
being a real problem. Yeah, that's a real problem. And, I think there was even like a rabies and diphtheria outbreak in Yemen, but also the psychological impact. I read a study back years, and this was only about the U.S. drone war in Yemen, but it had caused PTSD in like 90% of children in one village. And it created a situation where you had very angry young boys and very scared young girls.
Yeah.
And apparently, it was even enough the sound of a fan, which mimic a drone, to kind of set one of these young boys off. And so imagine
Terrible.
starting your life like this, having this kind of fear response to the buzzing of a drone that provokes anger at a kind of chemical neurological level. And now you're set on a course in life where there's not a proper education system. Who knows how many of your parents, family, friends have been killed in this war? There's no justice to speak of. So it's not even like you could, appeal to the justice system. It's not like Barack Obama or Donald Trump, both of who are pretty much equally responsible for this war. So it's not a
Yeah.
partisan thing, are ever even going to face the slightest criticism publicly for this war. Not even the least bit of public shame
Yeah.
for this war. And so I don't know like how you go about life that way other than being extremely angry and bitter.
Yeah. There is no response. You've been trained that that is your response to life. That's the only thing they're gonna know. One other thing is you hear often that these kinds of war, like bombing brown people in particular. Do you think there's an aspect of racism to this as far as people just not caring so much? Because I, think of like Kosovo and Sarajevo, and that was on the news constantly when I was growing up. Like it just seemed to be everywhere, and maybe that's just my perception, and not really. It's just anecdotal, I know, but it just seemed like to get so much coverage and so much importance when Clinton was in office, and those are white people though. So do you think there's an aspect of maybe that's one of the things I've heard about is sort of that it's racist, and I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a guy that listens to a lot of left wing podcasts because a lot of the great anti war journalism comes from the
Yeah.
left. And so they all definitely chalk it up to a piece of racism. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little bit younger, I guess, so I lived through the like kind of Kosovo war, and so I didn't have that experience. I've kind of walked away from 2016 feeling like that may not be the case, just because of how much they've gotten away with demonizing the Russians, and so. I mean, honestly, the way I hear some people talk about the Russians is on the left lower than they talk about Arabs,
Right.
and certainly value their lives almost none at all.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's just been kind of in our lifetime that level of demonization. You know, I've read in Tom Wood's books about beating up German people during World War II for not buying war bonds and stuff like
Right.
that. I mean, Japanese people aren't white, but that is certainly a different culture in the internment. So I don't know if it's
Yeah.
just the level of demonization we could do it to anybody as long as they speak with enough of an accent that we
Right.
really can't understand them, or if it actually does have to be that they're not white
Yeah.
children. So the Americans who watch the footage don't say, "Wow, that could be my kid."
Right. It may just be more of like a biological thing where people tend to uh, connect with and identify with people who look like them. So it may be more of a passive, unconscious thing I mean, you hear people go, especially in the area I live in, they should just make the Middle East a parking lot. Like, that's millions and millions and millions of people. Like, you think that's okay, but it's like it's an abstract. They don't think about it. You wouldn't say that about Canada if they pissed us off, but I don't know, maybe it's just the biological idea that and all the indoctrination of the Middle East being this hornet's nest, and it's just that it's crazy over there. We've had nothing to do with creating any of those problems either. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, the psychology of it all is so weird, isn't it?
yeah.
Because sometimes I'll be able to talk to people about Sana'a is actually the capital of Yemen, one of the oldest cities on the planet, possibly the oldest.
Well,
Some of the buildings there are centuries old. Go on and look at pictures of the old city of Sana'a, especially at night. They're absolutely magnificent. And I've provoked more of an emotional reaction from people talking about Saudi Arabia destroying these houses than the people in them.
wow.
So that's a really weird thing. And also, I remembered back to the Arab Spring and when Egypt and the army there was killing protesters, but then some of the museums
Yeah.
were looted. People were much more concerned about the museums and, dead ancient artifacts than
Yeah.
the people being mowed down. And then, what was I going to mention? Oh, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which is something that provoked a whole lot more
Yeah.
reaction. I mean, we're talking about at least tens of thousands of babies in Yemen who have starved to death.
Yeah.
And, one, middle-aged, overweight Saudi American, who's lived a pretty privileged life
Yeah.
ends up dead. And that's the outrage that sparks out. And not to, trivialize his death. I
Right.
mean, it's terrible that he was murdered. But let's, keep this in comparison to what
Yeah.
horrors have been going on in Yemen.
So
And the fact that,
proportionality.
that doesn't do anything at all for people Yemen. But Khashoggi and, suddenly Lindsey Graham is extremely outraged.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that I've, just been kind of upset about lately is the whole, the in New Zealand, the murders of the people in the mosque there and how outraged people are about that. And yet American troops do it all the time. So as long as they have that American insignia, then I guess it's okay to kill them. But a gunman in a mosque, that's a totally different thing. Like it's a terrible situation. I'm not saying it's not. It's just the fact that we just people just cut that whole section out, that the United States military has killed thousands and thousands more people, more Muslims than this one guy in a mosque. So,
Right, right. I mean, like the US has killed 50 people in a mosque before with a bomb.
right.
Like that's happened. A US bomb blew up a Yemeni funeral hall,
Yeah.
blew up a Yemeni blew
Wedding,
up a
yeah.
Yemeni school bus.
The
They
bus,
blew
yeah.
up a school bus flown by a Saudi pilot, but in an American plane with
Yep.
an American bomb. Americans probably helped with the logistical and the targeting and intelligence for the strike as well.
Yeah.
And so, that's fine. Those 44 people don't even count it. And in fact, I think, they're somehow supported by Iran. So, the Saudis were just doing the best they could. But these, 49 people or 50 people that die is absolutely tragic. But the fact that that gets so much more attention, especially the school bus being blown, that one really
Yeah.
bothered me because
Yeah.
I looked at that story and not that like I look at it and I'm, happy that, this happens and I think it's going to get media attention. But, there is that thought like, okay,
Now we'll
this is
finally get
going to
some.
be the one, right? I'm going to go on my show and talk about this and people are going to share it. People are going to be asking, hey, Kyle, what can I do about Yemen? Because, wow, I saw what happened there and that is absolutely unacceptable. And we had to, and you just,
You don't
no.
hear it. Yeah. I mean, you hear it from libertarians. I don't know many other people, and maybe some people, the anti war folks on the left, but I don't hear it in the mainstream. I don't hear anybody concerned about it. But you had mentioned it too, just to sort of round everything out. What can people do? What is it that we can? Is there a? Do you know of an organization that's particularly good at providing aid, or what can people do to sort of try and get this to stop?
Yeah, I mean, I know Doctors Without Borders has been doing a lot of good work on the ground in Yemen,
Yeah.
so that's always a group to look at. I know sometimes it's hard to make sure that that money is actually going to Yemen. So if you're somebody that's like, I only want money to go to Yemen, I think the Save the Children emergency fund is still all going to Yemen right now.
Okay.
So you could check that out. There is some legislation moving through the House and Senate right now. It passed the House, but with an amendment and because the US isn't, any kind of constitutional republic it pretends to be, you could pass a war powers bill with an amendment on it that I think has some vague condemnation of anti-Semitism, and then the Senate says that it's no longer a war powers resolution because it has the amendment, so it doesn't count. The Senate also passed SJ Res 7, and this was a war powers bill as well. And so it looks like it now has passed both houses and should go to the president's desk. Apparently, the president could veto a war powers bill, which is just Congress telling the president to end a war. And so I don't know. When I read the Constitution and I
Yeah.
passed, what was it, ninth grade civics, it certainly didn't sound like to me that the president could start on constitutional war and then both houses of Congress would have to have
Right.
2/3 majority to overrule him and overturn that veto. But apparently that's where we are in the US today. So
Right.
I mean, I'm not optimistic about the Congress group because 2/3 is a lot.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's absolutely brutal. You've even had like warhogs like Lindsey Graham start to get on board for this just because they've been, I think, pretty embarrassed by the Saudi war, the killing of the children, the killing of Khashoggi. So if you have a senator, specifically
Specifically.
a Republican senator, sorry everyone,
It's-
make sure you call and tell them, you better override the president's veto. And hopefully there would, it would look like the veto would be overridden and then Donald Trump would just back off the whole thing.
yeah. That would be a great thing. I know.
That's my dream.
Yeah. I don't know anyone who's Yemeni. I don't have a, like a connection there, but I just abhorred this sort of needless violence and suffering for people that they don't have to be going through it, and it's all because of our part of it at least is because of our intervention into that and support of people that we shouldn't be supporting in the first place. We shouldn't have anything to do with. So, Kyle, this has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it because it's something you know, I just didn't know a whole lot about, and it's not really my forte, foreign policy. So, um, it's really nice to kind of have more of an understanding of that and what the United States involvement in that is, and what we can do about it. So, I really appreciate that. And where can people find you and find your podcasts and your work again?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me back on the show. It's really cool. I'm getting to do some of these shows for a second time now. So I guess kudos to both of us staying power on our podcast. Most of my work can be found at libertarianinstitute.org. That's the great Skyhorn and Sheldon
Yeah.
Richmond's Institute. The site was having some problems for a while, but it's all back up and running now. The daily news round up that I write and the podcast are both featured on the homepage there. The LP Mises Caucus actually runs some of my work on their site, so I'm sure a lot of your audience is the Mises guys. They're great. You can find me there. My website is immersionnews.com. It's where I post news all day long. I try and make it in an accessible way. That way, if you want to kind of see what's been going on in Yemen, you can click on the Yemen tab and just get stories over the past 2 years about Yemen and
Great.
read up and learn all of it, or Saudi Arabia. Try to keep track of all kind of the big international stories, and stuff about drug war and police abuse, because it's important too.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Definitely. It's the standing army in the United States. So, um, now you mentioned Will Porter earlier. His name was escaping me for a second. Who is a great journalist as well. Do you know his website? Let's go ahead and give that, and where people can find his. Is he on? He's on the Libertarian Institute as well, correct?
Yeah, a lot of his writing ends up at the Libertarian Institute. He's written for Consortium News, antiwar.com. He has a big archive at the Daily Sheeple. He doesn't have his own website, so if anybody wants to
Okay.
find Will, it's on Twitter at WKP and Cap, and he has a
Okay.
link there to his archive at the Daily Sheeple. It's a ton of articles, great stuff. Me and him have done like 50 shows together on my podcast, and
Wow.
every time I have Will on, it's usually for something like in depth, where we're really picking apart like a report or an event to get all the little details. So,
Yeah.
whenever people are pissing you off at work talking about how, there's chemical weapons attached to Syria and Assad's a butcher and he has to go. There are episodes of me and Will breaking down pretty much every single chemical weapons allegation, and you could 100% guarantee that, you're going to have all the facts.
Right. That's great. Yeah, I think Will's great, and he's one of those, also just a journalist that I really value their perspective, and the work that they put into it to actually bring, not spin things, but actually bring the facts, real reporting, what people used to think that at least the newspaper journalist should be, but I don't know if it's ever actually been that way too much. Maybe at some point, but I don't see it anywhere in the mainstream very much today. So I think sometimes I look to foreign sources for American news, as well as the independent journalists, because they're more honest about what's going on over, here than they would be if they had to, get paid by people in the country. So it's pretty interesting stuff. But thanks again. I really appreciate it. And guys, if you want to find Kyle, please do that. Go to his podcast, the Foreign Policy Report, Foreign Policy Focus, and check out his writing. It's really great stuff. If you would like to support the Sherry Voluntary Show, you can go to Patreon and do that, and I would much appreciate that. And until next week, peace.